my friends. I am Vanessa Ghoulie. Today I'm here to host my very own horror show. And what's a better thing to focus on my own show about horror than horror in my favorite artistic medium, video games. So, turn down the lights, crank up the sound, grab your caffeinated beverage of choice, because it is time for gaming after midnight. The thing I get asked by both friends and strangers alike is, why do I like horror games so much, and why do I often say they are scarier than horror movies? I always say that it is because it is up to you, the player, to defend yourself. It is you who has to pull the trigger on the firearm. It is you who has to use a makeshift melee weapon to beat down a monster. It is up to you to try to make your situation better, and hopefully not worse. I especially love it when I play a game where I play as someone who is not used to normally having to defend himself with a weapon, or the weapon in question is one that is not exactly conventional. And I can't think of very many good examples of the latter of those situations than tonight's game after midnight, Fatal Frame. Fatal Frame is a game where, rather than using a gun or an everyday object-turned melee weapon to defend yourself, you use a camera and take pictures to defend yourself from angry ghosts. It's an idea that sounds strange at first, but maybe you can see it working. Of course, that's until you realize there's a lot more to fighting off ghosts than just clicking the shutter button, as you must keep in mind things like a limited supply of film and the power of each shot. Fatal Frame follows siblings Miku and Mafuyu Hinazaki, who have the ability to see the supernatural. The game begins with Mafuyu investigating the mansion of the Himuro family, located out in Japan's countryside, looking for his mentor, author Junsei Takamine. When Mafuyu is not heard from for 2 weeks, Miku travels to the mansion to find him. She soon discovers that the mansion is haunted by the ghosts of its past inhabitants, and her only means of defending herself is a supernatural camera that she and her brother inherited from their late mother. She also learns that Takamine and his crew were all killed by ghosts, with rope marks left on their limbs. With Mafuyu nowhere in sight, Miku continues to explore the mansion to find her brother and figure out what's caused the haunting of the Himuro mansion. Between its tense photography-based combat and a design philosophy built around creating patterns and then breaking them, Fatal Frame is one of the most terrifying video games I've ever played. Now, I wouldn't put it in the same league as the classics of its day, like Silent Hill 2 or the Resident Evil remake, but I would still say that Fatal Frame is a wonderful game for a night with the lights down and the sound up. As I said up front, Fatal Frame is based around the idea of using a camera and taking pictures as means to defend yourself from ghosts. You walk around the mansion in third person, looking for hidden items, reading files, and solving puzzles, traditional survival horror fare. When you come across a ghost, you can pull out your camera to defend yourself, which is done in first person. You aim the camera with the left analog stick and move Miku with the right, and if you have the camera reticle over a ghost when you take a shot, the ghost will be temporarily stunned and take damage. It's important to note that despite the camera being supernatural, the number of pictures you can take is limited by how much camera film you have on you, requiring you to make each shot count. This is where charging your camera comes in. When you're aiming the camera, you'll notice a set of characters on the bottom of the screen, and when the camera reticle is on a ghost, said characters start to glow. The glowing of these characters indicates how charged your camera is, and the more the camera is charged, the more damage the next shot will inflict on a ghost. There are different types of film that can fully charge a shot faster than others, but of course the better the film, the harder it is to obtain. You will also see that every time you take a picture of a ghost, you earn what are called spirit points.
The number of spirit points you earn is based on a few factors, such as how charged the shot was and where the camera reticle was on the ghost. The spirit points you earned can then be used to level up attributes of your camera, such as how fast it charges, or unlock power-ups, such as the ability to instantly lock onto a ghost's location. The use of the latter is of course limited, but it is helpful nonetheless.
The gameplay involving the camera is, simply put, wonderfully frightening. I mean, aiming in first person with the camera does help you get better shots, but it also makes it look like the ghosts are coming right at you, the player, which is always terrifying. There's also the fact that you have to keep so many different factors in mind, such as how much film you have left, and the strength of each shot, and where the ghost is compared to the camera reticle. Having to consider all these factors on the spot makes fighting ghosts an experience that's almost always heart-pounding for me. I did say almost always, but I'll explain what I mean a little later on.
Even when you are not dealing with ghost encounters in the first person, Fatal Frame manages to keep the tension level high. You know how it's often said that one of humanity's greatest instinctual fears is not knowing what's coming, especially when it involves something one is already familiar with? Fatal Frame takes that fear and exploits it. There are certain cues and events that have just enough of a pattern to make the player feel comfortable, and then said pattern gets broken just often enough to keep them guessing. The best example is with Fatal Frame's use of force feedback. Fatal Frame is a game with low visibility, so the player has to rely on non-visual cues to know when danger is nearby. One such cue is a pulse created by force feedback in their controller. This pulse is created anytime a ghost is nearby, and it's oftentimes your only warning before you're attacked. However, a pulse is also formed when something supernatural is nearby, such as a place you need to take a picture of for a puzzle. Upon realizing this, you can't help but feel uncertain and tense anytime you feel that pulse, as you're never sure if you're being told of a way you need to go or if you are in danger. Another example is with the game's cutscenes. Many times you'll see a cutscene of Miku entering a new area or seeing a vision of past events, and sometimes that cutscene is followed up by a ghost appearing a little too close for comfort. The key word is sometimes, because as soon as you become used to the idea of being attacked after every cutscene, there will be one that plays without a ghost appearing afterwards. You can't relax when the cutscenes play, because even if there wasn't a ghost attack after a last one, there's a high chance of being in danger right after this one. This tendency to create patterns the player can hold on to, and then breaking said pattern is a perfect way to create paranoia. Credit also needs to be given to Fatal Frame's audio design. While not on the same level as the works of Akira Yamaoka or Aubrey Hodges, the ambient soundtrack is effective at sending chills down your spine, and there's plenty of areas without music to prevent you from becoming comfortable with it. And then there's the cries of the ghosts, which I don't feel gets talked about enough outside of the game. You know how in Resident Evil you'll read notes and journal entries from people who have had terrible things happen to them, but then when you encounter said people, they're zombies that simply moan? In Fatal Frame, you'll also read notes and journal entries from people who have had terrible things happen to them, but when you encounter those people as ghosts, you hear them cry out about what happened. It's effectively disturbing, truly showcasing just how bad things went down in the Himuro mansion.
Fatal Frame's tension and scares are so well done that at times it is almost unbearable. You might not believe this, but even as someone who plays horror games on the regular, Fatal Frames is at times so intense and so terrifying that I can only play it in bursts. But then, if I consider this game to be that terrifying, how come I said earlier I wouldn't put it in the same league as Silent Hill 2 or Resident Evil Remake or any of the other classics of its time? Well, Fatal Frame is very good at creating tension, but then that tension is broken by several big problems with its design.
Visually, Fatal Frame is not that pretty of a game to look at. It doesn't look ugly, but there isn't much detail to the mansion or the objects in it, making a lot of areas look samey for lack of a better description. You could argue that this is due to being an early PS2 game, but Silent Hill 2 was released around the same time as Fatal Frame in Japan, and definitely looks a lot more lively and detailed, so there's no excuse there. The low level of detailing could have also been in service to having short load times, ones that are indeed well masked by the door animations, but in all honesty I'd rather deal with longer load times if it meant there could be more to the game visually. Fatal Frame goes for the horror tradition of having fixed camera angles, but uses standard 3D controls as opposed to tank controls.
Now personally, I don't feel tank controls are nearly as bad as everybody makes them out to be, but I can understand why people don't like them. At the same time, I do know that tank controls were designed with fixed camera angles in mind, and traditional 3D controls were not.
Moving around in Fatal Frame, you'll often find yourself getting turned around when the camera angle changes, especially in large areas and hallways with multiple camera angle changes. This is a big problem, seeing how many times you'll be running away from a ghost trying to create some space, you'll often accidentally get turned around and run into said ghost, taking damage.
Also, Fatal Frame relegates movement to the analog stick rather than the D-pad like most other survival horror games. But despite using an analog stick, where you can determine the difference between walking and running with how hard you press it in one direction, it has a run button. So you're going to do 3D analog controls but have a run button. At least if you hold down the run button independently of the analog stick, you'll always move forwards regardless of camera angle, so at least there's that.
But even when you are using the run button, Miku moves slow. And I mean slow. Miku's running makes her Resident Evil and Silent Hill counterparts look like Sonic T Hedgehog. It always feels like it takes way too long to get anywhere in the mansion, even when there is no locked doors between you and your destination. Painfully slow movement also applies to when you're aiming the camera. Remember when I said ghost encounters almost always make me feel tense? The almost part is due to the fact that later on in the game, you encounter ghosts that move really quickly and have projectile attacks. The controls do not give you enough mobility to effectively deal with the more mobile or projectile wielding ghosts, making later ghost encounters more frustrating than scary. The slow movement feels even worse when you factor in the games as puzzles. In fact, I wouldn't even say a majority of Fatal Frames' puzzles are even puzzles at all, most being fetch quests and scavenger hunts that boil down to find an item, or find this spot and take a picture of it. Not only are these puzzles unsatisfactory, but they make Fatal Frame feel longer than it actually is due to you running from corner to corner of the mansion at Miku's very slow pace. What's baffling is sometimes the item you need, or the spot you need to take the picture of, is in the exact same room where you discover the need for the item or picture, making you wonder why there was a puzzle or a locked door in the first place.
What this all boils down to is Fatal Frame is a slow, sometimes tedious game to make progress in, and the controls do not equip you for the ghost encounters later on in the game. The last couple hours of Fatal Frame feel a lot more tedious and boring than terrifying, and it is all made even worse anytime you have to redo anything.
A common trope of survival horror games is limiting the number of times and places you can save your progress, and Fatal Frame is no exception to this. This is a design choice purposely done to ratchet up tension, because when you can only save so often, you have to try your hardest not to die, otherwise you have to re-obtain all the progress you lost. I'm not criticizing Fatal Frame for incorporating this horror trope. What I'm saying is because of the problems mentioned earlier, Fatal Frame is probably the most frustrating horror game to have to redo anything in. It already takes long enough to make progress due to how slow and awkward movement is, getting lost to bland visuals, and having to fetch a lot of items, and it feels all the more grinding when you die after not saving for a bit, and then have to re-obtain your progress.
Fatal Frame makes some very clever design choices in regards to how it sets up the combat using photography, and how it sets up its scares in the environment. As I said, it's a game that at times I can only play in bursts, despite the fact that I play horror games on a regular. But then when the problems with the controls, the slow pacing, and the puzzles start to catch up with you, Fatal Frame becomes a game that is more boring and frustrating than scary. And I don't feel these problems come from following tropes of the horror genre. I feel like these are some genuine missteps with the game's overall design. I guess if you don't mind playing a game that literally moves slow and doesn't have the hardest puzzles in the world, then Fatal Frame can be a good game for playing with the lights down and the sound up. But if you want to play some truly great games from its time, I much more recommend Silent Hill 2 and the Resident Evil remake. They are much more refined than Fatal Frame. Great not just as horror games, but great as video games as well. I am a horror fan, but just as much as I am a horror fan, I am a gamer. And to me, a really great horror game can appeal both to those who just like video games and people who like horror more than video games. Fatal Frame doesn't quite fit that category. Seeing how beloved the Fatal Frame series is by its fans, I have a strong feeling this is a case of what I call first game syndrome, where a lot of the series' best refinements and features came later on in the series, so going back to the first game is kinda tough, and it feels obsolete in that regard. As of filming tonight's show, I have not played any of the later games in the Fatal Frame series. When I do bet yourself that I will bring it out for another session of Gaming After Midnight. But until then, my friends, I will see you next time.